Hi! This time I wanted to talk about using Conan the Barbarian as an example, as an exemplar for solo role-playing games where you are only controlling a single player character, and it also works with one-on-one role-playing games. That is, when you have a game master and a single player, maybe that player doesn't want to control an entire group of adventurers. He or she just wants to control a single adventurer. So Conan can provide some examples as to how to survive as a lone adventurer. There are some moments, and we will talk about that, where Conan teams up with other characters, but for the most part he is adventuring alone. So let's take a look into Conan's fictional life. This video marks the start of a series of videos where I examine the lives of different characters that are solo adventurers. I don't think I will be producing these videos too often, maybe every now and then, because these characters can get a bit complex. So let's get started. I want to give you both thematical and mechanical details that you can use in your role-playing games, that you can use as inspiration for those solo characters. Conan the Barbarian, also known as Conan the Thief, Conan the Conqueror, Conan the Pirate. He has been so many things throughout his life. It's somewhat difficult to pinpoint the very beginning of Conan as an adventurer, because in the original Robert E. Howard stories, we don't get too many details when it comes to Conan's childhood and when he was a teenager, and even when he was a young adult and later on middle-aged man and an older guy as well. Because Robert E. Howard wrote the stories out of order, out of chronological order. Yes, it's not an easy thing to pinpoint or be more precise when it comes to some details. But let's take a look at Conan when he was very young. Immediately you can see that Conan identified his strengths and weaknesses. It seems that for the most part Conan's strengths lie in his own physical capabilities, but also in his mental capacity. A lot of people that are quite casual or normies about Conan, they think he is perhaps just like a brute, like a guy with a lot of strength, and that's it. And remember that the Conan that appears in films and in comic books, it is a vastly different character when compared to the original Robert E. Howard's stories. Like I said in other videos where I mentioned Conan, he's more like a Celtic warrior. He's not exactly that big because of his portrayal in movies, because of Arnold Schwarzenegger's portrayal of Conan, and I forget the name of this other actor, you know, from the more recent Conan film. And in that series, I forget the name of those two actors, but okay. Most of the time when Conan is represented in live action films and series, he seems like just a huge guy, just too strong, too big. But in the Robert E. Howard's stories, he is described as a panther. Rather than a Siberian tiger, he looks more like a panther. So he's quite ripped, and he's big, but there are bigger characters in the stories, like for example the Vanir, or anyone who is like a man from the north. Those huge red-headed, almost gigantic people, they are much larger than him. So Conan, he is physically capable, but not as impressive as they would paint him in some stories and even some comic books. Because Conan identified that he is more capable physically and mentally when compared to his social skills, he's always moving situations towards violence or something that can be solved through physical prowess or through some sort of, just like a mental puzzle or test or situation. You can see a very young Conan that when he's talking to someone and he perceives or detects that that someone is leading the conversation into some sort of legalese or social conventions or protocol that give others the excuse to ridicule him or dishonor him or even imprison him, Conan immediately shifts the situation to a mental and physical field. Because sometimes you can be pretty intelligent and smart, but if you are not aware of the customs of a place, or if you don't get into that vibe, a certain social vibe, yes, you are at a disadvantage. So Conan immediately thinks about eliminating his adversary, or yes, and making his escape if the situation gets too dangerous. There will be some spoilers. I will try to avoid most of them, but let's say in one of the stories you see a very young Conan that is in the process of being ridiculed or dishonored by an adversary. So Conan, well, he gets really angry. That's one of the things that covers the social weaknesses in Conan's repertoire. Conan sometimes gains followers and allies and friends and all of that, but not because he follows certain social conventions, but because he is quite lethal. He is dangerous. If you cross Conan, if you are lucky, you are only going to regret it. If you are unlucky, you are going to die. So when young Conan identified that situation, he had only two things in mind: how to kill his adversary, because he was not going to take that dishonor. That is, Conan, despite his, if you were to put it in Dungeons and Dragons terms, Conan seems quite chaotic, but he does follow a certain code. Many say that Conan is chaotic neutral, but I wonder sometimes if he's actually neutral good or pure neutral. So Conan, like I said, he actually respects himself quite a bit, and he considers it like a lethal offense if he is insulted in such a grotesque or disgusting way. So Conan immediately finds a way to kill his adversary and snuffs out the only candle illuminating the immediate zone or area. This makes it quite easy for him to sneak out. Like I said, the Conan in the stories, he also feels a lot like a rogue. He is quite agile and sneaky. So he kills his opponent, snuffs out the light, and makes his way perhaps through the window or through the door. They do not describe it exactly. Robert E. Howard describes how he puts out the light, and when they actually manage to bring light back into the room, Conan is gone. So as you can see, that's a great example if you are playing as a solo player character that you put all of the points, if it's a point by system or if you made some rolls, all of those points or values are focused on physical and mental capabilities. So Conan in that way used his physical capabilities to be fast and strong, quite potent in killing his adversary, and he immediately devised a plan to make his escape from that room. So it's all about leading the situation towards your strength and covering those weaknesses. But let's talk about how Conan ingratiates himself or finds a way to obtain some allies or even a position within a certain group. It doesn't work all the time. That's one of the things about Conan. He's quite free. If you are a single player character, do not be afraid to run or escape from different situations. If Conan senses great danger towards his own person, he's going to make his escape. So Conan can attempt many things because there is always plan G. Plan G of get the hell out of here or out of there. So Conan always keeps that escape route in mind. I'm also going to avoid spoilers with this scene of one of the stories in Conan. let's say that Conan managed to make his way uh, inside of a ship. So he is there, he's surrounded by the crew, and they tolerate him. The captain of the ship is somewhat of a tolerant guy. He's quite the villain as well. He has, yes, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but let's say like he has his way with people. So you have this crew of shipmates, potential pirates, and they look at Conan, and one of them immediately starts to make fun of Conan. So what does Conan do? He kills the guy using his bare hands. He kills the guy quickly, immediately, and he turns around to face the rest of the crew members, and he's like, "Let's get along. Let's all get along." In other words, he's communicating that if they start to attack him in some way, they are going to die. So that sets a certain groundwork for Conan to work with. Now Conan is a threat, a source of danger in the ship, but at the same time, Conan is quite the hard worker because he's very capable physically and mentally. He does so many things. He's worth many men inside of the ship. That is, he's the equal of 3 or 4 or even more people working the ship that are quite inferior to him. And Conan senses that the captain of the ship now considers him a threat. And I know that many of you that work in different environments have seen this all the time. You see these little groups or cliques, but because of the way that the world has been quite cowardly structured, so that the person is constantly attacked and dishonored in many different ways, you cannot simply murder those that are attacking you, that are trying to make you wish that you have never lived, that you weren't had never been born. So you cannot kill them, at least not overtly, because you're going to get in trouble with different authorities. So in the case of Conan, because it's a different setting altogether, Conan is quite free to set that example. But at the same time, as I was telling you, this captain of the ship, he identifies that Conan is a greater man than him. And like I said, you can see this in real life with supervisors and bosses and all sorts of individuals that are actually not worth their position. And in the case of this captain of the ship, he is a perfect example of that. He wants all of the privilege, the privilege of leadership, but none of the responsibility or the ethical and moral qualities. So Conan, being pretty smart, he identifies this immediately. He knows that he won't be able to get along with this captain. So when the ship arrives to a particular island and they disembark, Conan waits for the first moment when this captain is alone, and he kills him, he strangles him. And then Conan goes back to the crew, and they're like, "Where's the captain?" And Conan is like, "I don't know." Who knows where he ended up? Conan is definitely, yes, he has a very interesting code. But after that, Conan takes control of the entire ship, and he actually protects the men from different dangers. I don't remember how many losses they took by having that brilliant idea of disembarking in that island, because as many of you know, Conan has this talent or knack to encounter all sorts of monsters, all sorts of supernatural threats. But like I said, that's the way Conan handles social situations. He eliminates threats, and most people follow him out of fear, but at the same time, because they respect him. They know that if they need help, Conan is the one who is going to rescue them. I was thinking, well, this can be applied to other settings. Like in science fiction, there are many gizmos and substances and special weapons and even psionic powers that you can use to remove obstacles within a certain social group. And at the same time, you can also secure your own position within a group when you are showing how much of a hard worker and a good ally or potentially a friend you are by helping those around you. That's why, for example, in the case of Conan, they the crew were pretty comfortable with the change of captains because Conan was a much better captain later on. Conan is a true leader of men, not based on charisma, but because he's willing to lead from the front. He's in the front lines, and he's kind of following that. I think it was Aristotle who told Alexander the Great that he couldn't ask of his men what he wasn't capable of doing himself. And Conan is able of doing that and much more. So people follow him, at least those people that he has come to terms with. Like I said, there have been other situations in which, other social situations, in which Conan gets there and he simply cannot get along with the group of people. They have even tried to kill him. And he needs to make his escape. So it depends on the group, but you can raise that is in the following the Conan path or the Conan way, you can raise your chances of getting that group to your side. I'm going to tell you, it's just such a great example, but at the same time it's somewhat of a braggy experience. So take it as you will. During a particular trip to the UK, well, the members of the group that I was traveling with, they didn't like me too much because they knew about my martial arts background, and they were these sort of guys that haven't trained martial arts, or the typical that I trained a few months of Taekwondo and now I'm an expert. So they were always trying to prove that they were better than me in that regard. So we clashed a few times, but it didn't come to blows, thankfully, because it's not a good idea to get into a physical confrontation in another country. Things can get quite messy. But they got to know me, and even though they didn't like me, they knew that in a certain situation, in certain dangerous situations, I could get them out of trouble. So these fools got tricked into that, the typical pretty lady that is somewhat revealing in her way of dressing. And she met them outside of a certain joint, and she was like, oh, anything that you can drink, and come inside, we're going to have fun. The typical scam. I can't believe they fell so easily for that. That happens in every part of the world, and it's so funny because they were acting like these people that, oh, we're city folk, we're city people, you don't, because you come from a backwater place, you don't know how to handle yourself in a place like London, and and so they fell for it, and they were trapped inside that place until they paid a substantial amount of money. When they actually came out of there, they basically got robbed. They lost a lot of money. One of them that was more aware of the irony of the situation was telling me that one of them, the one who was always trying to get into a fight with me, he was like, so somebody call Abraham, tell him to get us out of here. So you can see, even though he was always trying to pick a fight with me, he knew that I was able to get him out of those situations. So later on, we got a bit better along. I never trusted him. From then on, I cut off contact after that trip completely because he showed me his true colors, and I don't like people like that. But like you can see, sorry, that Conan, that's somewhat of the way of Conan. You show your yes, like you show other people what you are capable of, and even if they don't like you, they may come to like you eventually because of the things that you are capable of. And this is not me comparing me to Conan. Conan is he's just such a superior guy overall. That is, he was real, he's fictional, but he's an archetype. Another thing that benefits Conan so much is that he is willing to take risks. But like I said, he always has that plan to escape if things go wrong. But many times, Conan has taken some risks, even if better judgment or a more intelligent analysis of the situation tells you not to do it. Sometimes you have to follow your instinct. So Conan is a great example of combining instinct with a more rational way of proceeding. This is especially displayed when Conan fights monsters and when he's trying to reach some place that is guarded or protected by a monster. When it comes to personal combat, there is not a single character in the setting of Conan the Barbarian that can match Conan. Every time Conan fights a human, Conan is simply overwhelming. It is not like the movies and comic books, you know, like those scenes where Schwarzenegger is fighting these really huge barbarians, and the other barbarian in the second movie, I forget the name. In Conan the Destroyer, you know, that was kind of like the bodyguard of this princess. Although that has to do with the plotline, it was a very different situation. But in those movies, you can see Schwarzenegger like struggling somewhat when fighting those individuals. But in the original Robert E. Howard stories, it's clear, it's pretty obvious that Conan is much faster, sturdier, and stronger, and more potent than his opponents. And because Conan has been serving in different armies, a lot of people do not grasp that, but Conan, despite fighting more like an animal, he has also picked up some techniques. Every cut that Conan makes has a purpose, and he fights so fast. Like I said, he is described like a panther pouncing on his prey. He's fighting with these huge weapons, sometimes swords or axes, whatever it is available at that moment, and he swings them around as if they were so light. So yes, Conan is truly exceptional when fighting a human. But when it comes to monsters and beasts, Conan is not afraid to use every dirty little trick available in the book. Like for example, when he fought Thak, Conan knew that the moment that Eldritch Gorilla, you could call him, because he's not exactly a gorilla, he seems to be like an offshoot, like some sort of primal beast. If that thing ever got its hands on Conan, he was going to break him apart completely, rip him to pieces. So Conan fought against Thak, attacking him from the back and holding on to dear life in order not to get dragged into the front. So oftentimes when it comes to these encounters, you can see Conan sneaking around, attacking from behind, using some object, working with his environment, with the battlefield, to take complete advantage over his opponent. And this is a great example for player characters that are barbarians. If you like to play as barbarians, and some people play barbarians as if they are playing fighters, and that's not the way to do it. Fighters are more defensive. They have the staying power, the staying abilities, the feats, the properties of the class itself, just to be a bit more like a direct frontline combatant, serving as a shield for the party. But when you are playing as a barbarian, you should play as a rogue, in my opinion. You should play as a rogue because your armor class is usually inferior to that of the fighter. Even if you are playing as an armored barbarian, the fighter usually has some sort of qualities or properties or feats or whatever that allow you to be better at using armor, something that enhances your damage reduction or that gives you a bonus to armor class. It depends on the system. But as a barbarian, you are quite exposed. So your rage, when you activate that rage ability, that's when you actually manage to surpass the fighter. But in those moments, in those rounds or turns, there will be a time when your rage runs out, and then you will have to go back to fighting more in a support role. So yes, it's all about timing yourself and pacing yourself, identifying that maybe the fight starts and you start to fight quite defensively as a barbarian, rather. Yes, like taking less of a risk, going after the weaker opponents, going after those pesky spellcasters because of your speed and your advantage of climbing and jumping. But when there is need to do it, perhaps the fighter is in danger or a greater threat appears, then you turn on your rage. You go into this berserker rage and you go at it. That's when you need to take the risk, taking advantage of augmented damage that you are dealing and the hit points, the additional hit points that you obtain. And even if you are playing perhaps an old school RPG where there is no rage ability available, then in most cases you will need to play as a rogue. Take some risks when you feel like it is necessary, that there is no other way to do it, but the barbarian definitely needs to be played more like a support role, in my opinion, unless there are no other tanks or frontline combatants. So yes, Conan teaches you a lot about that, always fighting where he from an advantageous position. Now, when it comes to more mental tricks from Conan, it's mostly about identifying threats, gathering information, and noticing that, oh, that enemy is going to use these spells or magic. I better not even get close to that enemy, or attack him when he is not aware of my presence. Or, oh, that demon or monster or enemy, it is completely invulnerable. But it's better if I escape, or maybe I can throw that enemy or push it into this pit or chasm. Or maybe Conan identifies a certain substance that affects the monster. He's going to use that substance against the monster. So it's all about that. Again, you are identifying the greatest weaknesses of the opponent. I was going to tell you a very interesting case of Conan. Well, it is also obvious because of the stories when Conan is king, and when he serves as captain. I don't remember if he... Yes, he was captain once, or the chief of the Vamulas, that he has a great mind when it comes to strategies and tactics on the battlefield. It only takes a few seconds for Conan to identify the flow of battle when they are at an advantage or a disadvantage. There is a very, somewhat of a tragic scene when Conan gets paralyzed through sorcery. He is completely paralyzed and he needs to lead his troops into battle. And one of his captains, he is like, "Don't worry, Conan, I will lead the men to victory. And because I am of a similar constitution to yours, then I can actually pretend that I am you, so that you inspire the men in battle." But when Conan, he has one of his his men describe the situation in the battlefield, Conan immediately identifies that his substitute is going to die. Conan is like, no, he shouldn't take that route. He is going through that area where there is this cliff over him. He could get attacked from that cliff, and effectively they collapse the section of the cliff, and all of his forces and the captain, they get squashed. So Conan is pretty brilliant when it comes to those tactics. And like I said, he's very respectful of sorcery and the occult. In this other story, this antagonist, he's basically a very ancient individual. You could consider it like the Lich in Conan's setting. So somewhat undead, but not exactly so. And Conan, because he knows that this being is quite ancient, Conan knows that that enemy could probably kill him with a thought, or with the blink of an eye, or with a word. So when Conan is in the presence of that enemy, Conan is like, almost like if he was a being pointed with a gun, but even worse. Imagine, this is a being that can kill you with a thought. So Conan is like, so what's it gonna be? How are we going to proceed with things? And the enemy is like, now I have you, and because you are the king, I can take you prisoner. And Conan is like, okay. Conan is not going to take action because he knows in that moment he's at a complete disadvantage. Just like in real life, there are going to be some situations, like I said, sometimes you could be just like held at gunpoint. It would be really stupid unless several factors come into play. The thug gets distracted, you are at a certain distance, you know that you are capable of closing the distance almost immediately. Only in very specific cases, maybe you can take action, but otherwise it is not worth it because you can die quite easily. And Conan identifies this, and only later on, after he fixes many things in his favor, then he takes action against this enemy. But at that moment, Conan is completely helpless, and he identifies the situation, even though he's probably gnashing his teeth and getting really angry. At that moment, he cannot act. So Conan is able to steady himself or keep control of his murderous impulses when it is necessary. Very different from Solomon Kane. Although Solomon Kane, in some cases, that has worked in his favor, that, again, murderous rage from Solomon Kane. But in other cases, Solomon Kane has fallen to, I wouldn't say exactly traps, but has gotten in some disadvantageous situations because he couldn't keep that anger in check at the moment. You can let it all out when it is the time to do so, but there will be some moments where you have to steady yourself for the moment. So yes, if you are playing as a single player character in the style of Conan the Barbarian, if you have built that character towards physical capabilities and mental capabilities, it's all about staying outside of certain social protocols and always either defeating your enemies through physical means or outsmarting them using your strategies and tactics. Perhaps if it's those systems where you get some checks based on your intelligence or your wisdom, and you get a modifier if you are successful, or the game master gives you some clue concerning a particular situation, you should always move the situation towards that, either towards combat or problem solving through your mind. So yes, I think many other things could be said about Conan. I've mentioned this in some of my Conan videos. Maybe I should make like a Conan playlist, because I have talked about him a few times. You could say many things about his diet. Yes, let's talk a bit about the way that he cares about himself. He's quite natural in everything, in what he eats, in the way that he exercises. He's constantly climbing and jumping, and many people do not know this, but the best exercise that you can do to strengthen your fist so that you do not break your hand when you fight, it's not the typical punch as a hard surface to strengthen your knuckles. That strengthens your knuckles, but it does not strengthen all of this. In order to keep these bones from being fractured when you are in a fist fight or any sort of physical confrontation, I would recommend that you climb and that you carry very heavy things just using your fingers, or you try to break things using your fingers. That's going to give you the density to be able to punch hard. There are karate practitioners that have gotten the wrong idea that they keep punching like stones and bricks and those pebbles and wood, but they do not take care of the rest of the hand. And when it's time for them to fight, they actually break their hands. Their knuckles are going to be fine because they have strengthened their knuckles, but all of these bones are so important. So I mention this because Conan almost always takes the harder route when it comes to moving about or doing different tasks. Some of you could be thinking that's a waste of time, but because Conan is always taking that harder route, he is constantly exercising and strengthening his body. And I also think that the way that he lets his hair quite long is also an advantage for him. I think that if you are creating, I will tell you why in a few moments. I think that if you are playing as like a Conan sort of player character, that could serve as your background. You could tell the game master, or if you are playing by yourself, you can make it so that, oh yes, my character has been surviving in the jungles or in the tundra, in the frozen mountains or in the forests, and he has been doing all sorts of things, and that's how you create your backstory. That explains why your character is so strong or so agile or so intelligent, because of all the situations that he has survived. Now, here's the thing that I was going to tell you about the hair. Maybe you know of these Celtic warriors, how do you say it in English? Gessetai? I think it's Gessetai. Gessetai. Well, it's the typical Celtic warrior that fights naked. They were quite fearsome, and you would say, how come they are fighting naked? If there is armor, aren't they worried about their protection? And they had long flowing hair. And there is a story of Samson, in the Bible. And many people that like to explore those mysteries, like for example the Jewish bodybuilder Joseph Greenstein, that defeated 10 Nazis at the same time with a single baseball bat. And that's not an easy thing to do. You can get overwhelmed. They can capture you and take the bat away from you. If you get into a grapple sort of situation against 10 people, that's the odds are not good. But he managed to defeat 10 Nazis. He also received a bullet to the head, and the bullet did not penetrate his skull. It did knock him out, but he was fine otherwise. You can look this up if you don't believe me. There are some videos and there is information. You can do some research about Joseph Greenstein. And he also believed that you should let your hair flow. And this is because when you let your hair flow, supposedly you're going to become healthier, stronger, supposedly. And that is up to you to decide if this is true or not. In my case, I am letting my hair grow because supposedly I obtain many benefits. The sunlight is stored in your hair, granting you better health, strength, vigor. And the hair also works like antennae. Many of you know about Vietnam. During Vietnam, the United States government had the brilliant idea of, because almost everybody knows that it was an experiment. That conflict was an experiment. So, by the way, if this video gets taken down, I have a backup channel in Odysee. I'm going to put the link in the description below. So the government took different Indian crackers, and because you know that American Indians, they are excellent when it comes to, well, the ones that stick to tradition. They are excellent when it comes to fighting and tracking. But when they got them into the army, they cut all of their hair. You know, the typical haircut that they use for soldiers and in different schools to better dominate people. Everyone who has been completely, they have shaved their hair off. They are at a huge disadvantage when it comes to domination by others. Don't believe those lies that, oh, being bald is great. No. If you lose your hair, you lose that extra perception. That's why in so many monasteries and totalitarian regimes go towards China and North Korea. They want people to, not to have long hair. So they cut the hair of those Indian trackers and warriors, and they performed quite poorly in Vietnam. So this piqued the curiosity of the evil scientists of the US government. And they said, what if we take soldiers and let them with their hair completely, very long hair, without shaving their hair, and we take another group of soldiers and we shave all of their hair completely. They sent those two different groups. The group composed of bald soldiers, they got massacred. And the group consisting of soldiers with long hair, they all survived. And they did this twice. That is 4 control groups in total. That two groups that were bald and 2 groups with long hair. And in both instances, the soldiers with long hair survived. So you could be thinking, why aren't they doing this with all of the different soldiers? They should all have like a really long hair. Well, that's because the hair serves as an antenna, and you're more capable of detecting deceit when someone is trying to trick you. And if you are a soldier, a part of the government, you're going to detect many disgusting things. And that's not a good soldier for them because they cannot be easily controlled. So in the case of Conan, it makes perfect sense why he lets his hair grow so long. Like the Gazette of all that fought without armor, letting your hair flow, and perhaps in the case of Conan, exposing his skin to the sun is going to make you so superior. In the case of Conan, he doesn't need armor in some instances. In other situations, he is wearing armor, but in other situations, like the image from my book of Conan, he is almost completely naked because it is during that state where he is able to attack harder and faster, so he doesn't need protection, because when the blow is about to land, the blow is about to land, Conan is no longer there, or Conan has already decapitated his foe. So yes, those are the things that I can say about Conan when it comes to why he has survived for so long. He is so adaptable, so physically capable. If you are playing as a single player character, you can use that as inspiration for your background, but also when you approach those fights, approach those combat situations like a rogue. And only when it is necessary to do so, go all out, unleash your barbarian rage, and you, if the game master or referee is a good game master or referee, you're going to be surviving most of the combat situations. It's really amazing how Conan, in all of the books, they can only capture him when he's facing several opponents at the same time, and one of them is attacking him from behind. That is when it comes to humans. When it comes to monsters and primordial beasts and all of those, yes, in that case, Conan needs to employ really some very intelligent strategies and tactics. Yes, okay, like I said, I hope it serves as inspiration. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you so much to those of you that have been supporting the channel by sending drive-thru RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you and see you later.